Hey everyone, welcome to episode 8 of the LRA Research to Practice show. Tonight we'll be looking at gaming. We'll be thinking and talking about gaming in the classroom and gaming in education. And we have a star-studded cast of characters tonight. We have a great expert panel. With that being said, my name is Ian O'Byrne. I'm a researcher at the University of New Haven. And I wanted the panelists to introduce themselves from left to right, at least my left to right, starting with Antero. Go ahead, sir.
Hi, everybody. My name is Antero Garcia. I'm an assistant professor at Colorado State University. A lot of what I'll be talking about tonight builds on my experiences from being an English teacher out in South Central Los Angeles prior to moving out here. So thanks for having me.
Thank you. Next up is our wild card. Garth, you want to introduce yourself?
Well, I'm Garth. I'm a YouTuber. I play video games. I've been playing video games since I was like a really little kid, and I've enjoyed it, and yeah, thank you for having me.
Thank you. Hannah.
Hi, my name is Hannah Gerber, and I'm an assistant professor at Sam Houston State University, and a lot of what I'll be drawing from tonight is some research that I've done within the public schools, inner city schools with game-based learning, as well as some other collaborative research that I've done with gaming in libraries.
Thank you very much. Our discussant for the night, Hiller Spires.
Hi, I'm Hiller Spires. I'm a professor at North Carolina State University and a senior research fellow at the Friday Institute. And my experience with games is we've had NSF funding for about a decade now in collaboration with the Department of Computer Science, and we've been focusing on 8th grade and 5th grade science and game-based learning.
Very cool.
Thank you for having me.
Hey, thank you for coming.
And hi, I'm Jane Lammers. I'm an assistant professor at the University of Rochester and also the director of the English Education Teacher Preparation Program and a former English teacher. So I got interested in gaming mostly around what youth are doing outside of the actual gameplay to create content and write stories and some other things that they post and share online.
Very cool. Thank you very much. Tonight, playing the role of Oscar Causey is Mike Mandarino. So we want you to know that there is a Twitter feed out there. So if you leave questions for us on Pound Literacies or Pound LRA Show, you can leave comments and questions, and we'll feed them into the panelists. Also, we have the shared document with our show notes that's out there. That is public, and that's available for you. That's on the event page. We'll share all of this out on the Twitter feed as well, so you can get in touch with us and you can interact with the panel. So with that being said, let's get started. What we wanted to do is, tonight is talking about gaming and gaming in education, and to start us all off, I thought it'd be interesting to have each of the panelists basically define for us what is gaming. What is this that we're all talking and thinking about? So with that, Hannah, let's start with you. What's gaming?
Well, I think it's really hard to nail down what gaming is, because I think it is so many things to so many different people. But to me, gaming is an environment, and it doesn't have to be digital gaming. It can really be open to, board gaming, different types of gaming. But for the sake of what we're talking about, we'll focus on digital gaming. And it's a set of rules that allows people to move through and complete tasks and goals, but it's more than that. I think games, especially really good games, draw people in, have storyline, really allow people to get immersed and experience multiple situations. And so really that's just a pretty basic, I think, definition of what I would say gaming is.
Very cool. Antero, anything you'd add to that?
Yeah, I think Hannah started us. This is a terrible start, but she started us off with a good definition. For me, though, I think she's also right that it's a slippery thing. It's like the Supreme Court on pornography, right? Like, I know it when I see it is kind of how I think we can think about games. And I think our wild card Garth would probably be the best person to break this down, being a YouTuber who's probably really passionate around specific types of games. For me, I think about games can be different things for different people. Oh man, but I'm just bastardizing the English language today. It's terrible. But I think one thing I'd like to think about is that games in general move towards some sense of resolution, right? And that means if it's a video game, you're getting towards the end of a level or completing a stage. If you're doing a collaborative storytelling role-playing game, you're moving towards completing a specific narrative thought. If it's Monopoly, it's about running around in circles until you don't have any more money. But there's a specific point that's not necessarily about winning or losing, but about resolution that I think we can think about across games. And I think that's both for digital and analog games. Even sandboxy games like Minecraft or Dwarf Fortress, which I've been reading about but haven't played. I think these are games where you have a sense of purpose in what you're getting to. Are you going to build the Eiffel Tower in Minecraft with enough blocks, or aren't you, right? That in all of these contexts, there could be a sense of competition, but that's not inherent in what makes a game, I'd say.
Garth, you've heard Hannah and Antero talk about rules, and there's got to be resolution to it. To you, what is gaming?
Well, gaming to me is, well, for specific games such as like sandboxes, it allows you to do whatever you want, and it allows you to be however creative you want to be. I mean, in a sense, but and then games such as like Call of Duty, it allows you to be like this war hero. It allows you to be this other person in like another universe, I guess you could say, and it allows you to be another person, allows you to live another life, I guess,
Step in somebody else's shoes.
Yeah.
Very cool. Jane, what do you think? What's gaming?
So I would pick up on what I heard Garth say in terms of gaming as identity play. This idea of a space in which you can interact and try different things on. Try a different identity on. And one thing that I didn't hear anyone else say is the idea that games are social. Whether or not Garth is playing in a room by himself and just doing a first-person shooter, not interacting with anyone else, it's still a social practice in that there's, genre at play, there are expectations of certain types of games, he's engaged in a certain gaming discourse when he plays, so even if there aren't others in the room with him, he's engaged in this social practice of gaming that I think is really interesting to some of the literacy researchers and educators out there.
Very cool. So to the panel, what's so exciting about gaming? I mean, like I said earlier, everybody's jumped on to this episode, and everybody's been so excited, and they want to know more. And why is gaming so exciting, in our society? Jane, I'll let you start that off.
Well, I think one of the reasons why gaming's so exciting is if you're a parent or a teacher, you see a lot of young people doing it. If you watch the news or listen to radio, if you look at parenting magazines, you hear lots of hype about it. You hear lots of warnings about it. It's $1 billion industry. And so everybody from literacy researchers to educators are trying to understand, what is this? Is it good for the kids? Is it bad for the kids? Do we have to control it? Should we let them go forth? And so I think there's a lot of mixed messages around gaming. But when you see young people spend hours and hours engaged in a practice, trying to build the next level, trying to build the Eiffel Tower in Minecraft, whatever it may be, there's something really interesting going on there, and we want to understand what it is.
Hannah, anything to add to that?
Yeah, it's very, very similar to what Jane said. I think what is so exciting about gaming is that it's still, and I think we alluded to it earlier, it's still almost a wild frontier. There seems to be so much open space for us as researchers and scholars to really dig into this idea of gaming and learning, gaming and education. And so I think for me that's part of what makes gaming as a research field exciting. But gaming itself as exciting, I think Jane really, really hit the nail on the head with it. It's something that is so immersive and that is $1 billion industry and that people are so heavily engaged in. There's just something about it, and I think Garth also talked about it. He gets into it and he takes on these identities, and I think as somebody who dabbles some in gaming myself, I'd have to say that's a big part of it. Is it's just this immersive, exciting environment to be a part of, where you feel like you're involved in what you're doing. So the situated learning.
So Garth, you hear us talking about this, and we're talking about, well, what are those kids doing? And we use words like identity, and and you even alluded to that. You said you're trying on different identities. What's happening in gaming? Why is gaming so exciting to you?
Well, gaming is exciting to me because, like I said, it allows you to have multiple identities with specific games, and also it allows you to achieve goals that you wouldn't be able to achieve in like normal life. So for a kid that couldn't say, I don't know, like he couldn't do this. I know it's a big comparison, but let's say if he couldn't do this thing, he could go on a game and he could build whatever he wants. He could go on a game, he could be whoever he wants on a game, and I think that's what's so interesting about games, is because it draws you. You could do whatever you want. You could be whoever you want. You could just play and be a part of the game too.
So Antero, when we look at identity and trying out different roles, what are some challenges and opportunities in that?
So, well, first, can I go and can I answer your other question really quickly first, and then come back? I'll circle around. We'll do a U-turn. I'd say what's exciting about games is that maybe that's not the right premise, in that games aren't exciting for a lot of students, right? And I think that came out pretty clearly in the first part of the literacies chat I was able to join on Thursday, that there's a lot of people who kind of don't really care about games, right? And if we're to impose them in classrooms as the new mandate, we're setting ourselves up to failure. And I think that's one thing we need to recognize, is that games work really, really well for a select group of people, and they work kind of well for another group of people, and they're totally going to flounder for another group of people. So thinking about that, I think one of the things that's possible with these identities is that games can and should be different things for different people. So as we think about games in classrooms, there need to be different points of entry and different purposes for them, even in the same game. So for example, my wife and I play a lot of games together. My wife beats me at a lot of games. Maybe I should put it that way. And she likes competitive games where she can beat me and make me feel bad about myself for a couple of days. I don't know what this says about our relationship dynamic. But I also like games where I get to play a zombie and chase her around on a board. And so she likes competitive games where there's clear winners and losers in the game. And I tend to like role-playing games. That's the area of research I tend to be in, where I like that we go on an epic quest together and we tell a cool story, but that bores her to tears, right? There's different kinds of games for different people. And so thinking about what Wildcard Garth was saying, and I'm just going to call you Wildcard Garth for the rest of the night, Garth, I hope that's okay. I think the most important part of this for identity is it's a transgressive activity, right? I get to be someone. I don't get to be in the real world, the quote-unquote real world. I get to break social norms, right? If I get to play Grand Theft Auto and hijack a car, that's something I wouldn't be allowed to do and I wouldn't want to do in real life, but there's a thrill to be able to see what happens, right, in the simulation, to see what happens. And while that's a problematic space for us to consider, and we should consider it and think about it with students, I think it's also a civic opportunity, right, to think about what's our place in this virtual world, and then transfer those types of literacies back to think about, like, what's our place in the world today, right? Games are a place to model and test out new spaces and new hats for us to wear.
So what about one of the things that we've alluded to it a couple times is these challenges. At times games will force us into these questionable spaces. You're right. I'm not allowed to go out and just grab my neighbor's car right now. I've tried it a couple times. It doesn't work out well. So is this problematic when we talk about bringing games into our schools, possibly, or our students, living in, a gaming environment or doing this all the time? Is there a problematic part of that? Are they automatically going to go off and be, criminals or ne'er-do-wells?
I mean, I think if we think about, like, the most violent thing students will ever encounter in their schooling career is Romeo and Juliet, where in the first couple pages there's references to rape and violence, right? And we need to make clear how to read that. And I think the same way we need to do that, we need to talk about Call of Duty. We need to talk about Flappy Bird and the politics of capitalizing on one sad bird's lonely existence in a world of pipes, right? I think these are spaces where the role of critical media literacy really helps us unpack what games are for and what kinds of assumptions are in them, right? So when we're getting dizzy moving around the Monopoly board, for example, right? Just as a very basic example, let's think about how capitalism is a part of what that means, right? How when I spend 99 cents on Candy Crush to unlock the next couple of levels, how there's a machine that fuels the addictive patterns of games today, right? That the different levels of how we need to read and think about identities are important ways to read text, right? If games are text, they're just as important as Shakespeare for us to understand the world around us today.
And
So you're saying equate different games, different games as to text. Jane, what are you thinking?
Yeah, I was also thinking that what Antero's getting at is this also what's becoming this expanded notion of what a teacher is responsible for in the classroom. English teachers at the secondary level, elementary teachers at having them for all classes. This idea of what critical media literacy is now is more than just interpreting the news. It's also just looking at all of the different messages that are coming at youth from various devices, game being just but one of them, right? So the idea of games as text gives us a really interesting space to analyze how characters are portrayed, how violence is portrayed, how actions and reactions happen. And it's something that teachers and parents and schools have to be aware of. I think on the one hand, some spaces and some schools are kind of locking down and adding these, really hyper-restrictive environments and rules around what can't be in there. But even if we've got spaces that do bring games in, I think there's still another caution for teachers. We don't want to ruin games for kids either. So while we do want to take this critical media literacy approach and this idea of interrogating the text, interrogating the game, being critical consumers and understanding it, we also don't want to ruin Garth's games by having him, interrogate every move he's making. Maybe he wants to spend the 99 cents to get the extra Candy Crush levels, right? And so why should school ruin it?
So, go ahead, Hannah.
I was going to say, I absolutely agree with that. I think that's one of the things that I fear the most is that we take something that youth enjoy and we turn it into something that we assess the heck out of. Take a look at some of the greatest literature. We've made it into this a cesspool of questions and multiple choice, and I think what it really comes down to is, I think something Jane also alluded to is, and Antero did as well, is the teachers, and what type of preparation are we going to have to become more involved in for preparing this new type of reading of these new texts. It's a whole different style of teaching when you bring it in, and it becomes more choice-based. Different things become important for us to pay attention to when we're bringing these, I'll call them text video games, into classroom spaces. I really think it comes into something that we have to recognize, as Antero said, different games for different students, but also how can teachers bring these in such a manner, and what can we as teacher educators do to prepare teachers to be able to really grab onto this and use them in classrooms in ways that are effective and engaging.
So Garth, I have a question for you. How many times have your teachers talked to you about games and about, bring games in the classroom and have dialogue about it? And the second part of the question is, well, I'll let you answer that first. Go ahead.
Okay, well, recently teachers haven't really talked to me about games, but when I was in 6th grade, to be exact, I was in social studies, and we were learning about ancient Rome. My friend and I, we were going to go on Minecraft and build ancient Rome, and we did, and he allowed us to bring it into school and show us the whole class. And it was amazing because we recreated a piece of ancient history in a game, and yeah.
So did you like that? Yeah, it sounds like you like that one situation, but what we're talking about here is, there's a challenge. Games don't work for everyone. Some of us would want the games to be brought into the classroom and we have dialogue about the games, but then also maybe we don't want it. What are your feelings about this? Would you rather that teachers bring it more into the classroom more often and talk about it?
Yeah, depends on the game too. like I was just thinking if we take Call of Duty and like we bring physics into it, I think that would be awesome. But I'm also not every student in the school. But I think it would be awesome on how to learn on how like the mechanics of the gun works, how the mechanics of like how the person walks in the game, stuff like that. And I think that would be really cool if teachers implemented that into education with games that kids just go home and play and think it's nothing, and then they add this whole meaning of like real life to it.
Very cool. So what we're trying to do is... Go ahead, Jane.
I'm sorry. I was going to say they might be safer using Portal in the physics class as opposed to Call of Duty. Less killing people, but...
Yeah, I was just...
But it's a good example of like showing how, you know, real physics, real science is happening behind those games.
Mm-hmm. So in terms about in looking at what we can learn about learning from games, in research, what is the big research that has been done, and what motivates and guides the researchers on this call? Like what do you research? What have you studied, and what really gets you excited in the research field? We'll start off with Hannah.
Well, I think the seminal work would be G's work with the learning principles and, situated and embodied learning, and, everything that's kind of inherently involved in how video games really are just, they're learning tools. A good video game, you're going to have to learn something to be successful, and it's going to take you through particular steps to be able to be successful through tutorials and other manners to get to a certain level. I think something that I know that another scholar, Sandra Abrams, and I have been working on is, and it comes out of some Katie Salin's work, is developing a feedback loop that can be used within classroom structures that doesn't even just, you're not just even thinking, okay, well, we're bringing video games in, but we're bringing the mechanics of play in. So it's more than gamification, because gamification is kind of a loaded word itself, but it's really taking a look at what are these principles of feedback, iterative learning that occurs in video game environments. How do people understand where they are, where they're going, and how they're making sense of situations through leaderboards, through health bars, through in-game maps, and then how can we transfer that into a classroom situation so that students are becoming a part of this iterative cycle of learning where they're working with partners, they're working with peers, and so it becomes this structure of how do we take what's inside a video game, those elements that allow people to understand what they're learning and allow them to move through, and then try to replicate that within classroom environments. So it's not even necessarily using games in the classrooms, but it's using the principles of gaming.
And one of the things I wanted to mention is that the panelists have done a great job on the show notes, basically putting together an annotated bibliography, linking a lot of different content. They've also shared a lot of papers and research of their own that's in the shared folder. All of these materials are out there and available for the audience now and forever, at least until Google makes us take it down. So all of this stuff is out there for us. So Antero, what research gets you up in the morning?
I think it's research on circadian rhythms that try to gets me coffee. But in terms of games, I think that Hannah's right that G's work has done a good job of bridging kinds of informal learning that's happening, the connected learning that's happening, and thinking about how this can transfer into schools. My own research has built more on what Jane McGonigal's done with alternate reality games, right? So I'm not a digital game person in general. I tend to think about analog games and storytelling types of games. And so for me, alternate reality games layer this layer of fiction on top of the real world. So we interact with, we make believe that some kind of phenomena is happening and build on top of that. So it takes on this principle of what other research calls the magic circle, right? That when you enter into the space of a game, the ritualized space of a game, we're able to disregard the social norms around us and are able to put on these identities temporarily. And so the magic circle stuff comes from this guy in this book called Homo Ludens, but it also tends to expand on I think a body of anarchy research particularly around things like the temporary autonomy zone and David Graeber's look at Occupy Wall Street, right? So there's a very civic purpose in what happens when we enter these spaces, and the ways that we collaborate when we play games. So Pierre Levy's idea of collective intelligence, I think, is also an important idea, that what the kinds of learning that emerge when lots of us are set together to solve a problem together. And then lastly, one of the things I did before I left Los Angeles is I helped open a new school in Los Angeles called the Critical Design and Gaming School, and that school focuses less on gameplay than game design principles, right? And so thinking about, when we think from a systems thinking approach, right, what kinds of things happen to how we approach literacy, how we approach mathematics or STEM-related courses, right? And so I think that's another space that I'm interested in thinking through.
Very cool. Jane, what do you think? What's the big stuff in gaming that we should know?
So some of what I've added to our show notes are links to some of the centers for gaming research that I think are particularly generative and interesting out there. So Games Learning and Society and the folks over at the University of Wisconsin-Madison who are having their conference this week. I've got links there. Also, Arizona State University has a new Center for Games and Impact, where they're also looking at questions around assessment in games, quests for teaching, quests to learn, things like that. Quest Atlantis is now, the researchers who developed that is now housed there. The MacArthur Foundation's Digital Media and Learning Initiative is also generating a lot of really interesting research that kind of started with some of the early work for Henry Jenkins and participatory cultures, Mimi Ito and her group to do in-depth case studies of what youth are doing around digital media that's now led to their connected learning work. I think all of that is really, really interesting. We've got folks doing maker fairs and craft technologies, game making, Minecraft, Scratch, all that kind of stuff. For me, what really gets me up and researching every day is not what youth are doing in their games, but what they're doing around their games, what G calls the big G game or the metagame, this idea of interacting in an affinity space in groups, connecting to resources, building off of what Antero said about collective intelligence, the idea that what happens is more than just what happens on the screen, in the game, in the interaction, but it's also all the work that young people are doing to write stories that are based on their games, to create walkthroughs, to put up YouTube channels of their video games like Garth, and all the other work that happens around the game, kind of in the wild. And that's the part that I'm particularly interested in.
So, Garth, we've talked a lot about the social side of gaming, and Jane was talking about affinity spaces. In your world, you know, we've mentioned a couple times, the links are on the show notes. You know, you have a YouTube channel, you have, how many videos, how many walkthroughs do you currently have?
Well, videos, I think I have 105. I'm not sure, but my YouTube channel is a collection of videos from like 2008, which are just like skits with my friends, up till like now, which is gaming. So.
And when I last checked, I think you had a little over 200 subscribers. So I think people would rather watch you play Minecraft than me talk about Google Docs. One of the things I've known Garth for a little while. One of the reasons why I wanted to have him on is I mentioned to him a little over a year ago that I wanted to get my 3.5-year-old into gaming. And we've been playing some Wii, and I mentioned that, you know, he plays on the iPad a lot and does different things with us, and I asked about Minecraft, and I saw his videos, and so Garth put together a couple tutorials for 3 or 4-year-olds on how to get started in Minecraft. So in terms of the social side in these spaces, Garth, online, how do you socialize with other gamers, with other YouTubers? What's that world like?
Yeah, I actually have a friend who I met over Minecraft who lives in YouTube, over Minecraft and YouTube, who's all the way in California, and we're like best internet friends, I guess you could say. And we play the same games, and we're just like best friends. And And yeah, and over like talking over YouTube, it's just a whole community of people that like love to do the same thing as you do. It's kind of going to a convention of just YouTube, which they do have, but it's you don't have to go anywhere. You could just walk downstairs or go upstairs to your computer and you just log on. You message somebody and they'll respond back, and you have this conversation. You become friends, or you make videos together, and it's this whole community that just like helps each other.
So you just coined a new term, the best internet friends. Is that it, Jane?
Yeah, the BIFs.
The BIFs. So Garth, why do you hang out with your BIFs?
Because sometimes people that you know in real life, they might not have the same exact interests as you. They might play a game or two, but my friend who lives in California, he's my best internet friend, but I have bestest or that friends that live like in the same town that I do, but has the same interests. So if I were to categorize all my best friends, he would be in the top 5. So.
Have you ever met him offline?
Like, have we ever met up in like real life? No.
Yeah. Okay.
And a follow-up to that, Ian, is does that matter to you, Garth, that you haven't?
No. Like, I know he's not a creepy person. I know he's not like a stalker living in a basement his whole life. But it doesn't really bother me, because you don't have to meet somebody to have the same interests. You don't have to be face to face to have the same social conversations that you do on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, and I think what Garth is getting at is exactly, what Mimi Ito and her group talk about, interest-driven participation, the way Jim G framed affinity spaces as, the common endeavor is what brings people. It doesn't matter to folks like Garth who this BIF is in real life. It doesn't matter what they do. All that matters is that they have this shared interest around YouTube, Minecraft, and they can get together and become friends, as he says, in a way that kind of supports their passion, supports their interests.
Any other follow-up questions, Antero, Hannah? No. So one of the things we wanted to take a little pivot, and we wanted to look at the classroom. And so we talked a little bit about the research. Frequently in all of our fields in education, there's this mindset that we should be able to look into a classroom and see what this really looks like. So if I'm a school administrator, if I'm a teacher, if I'm trying to make this happen in my classroom, what does this look like? When I look into a classroom and I see, gaming or game-based learning, or I got scolded the other night in the literacies chat when I see gamification happening. What does this look like? What should we be building? What should teachers be trying? Hannah, what do you think?
I was going to say, I would love to actually jump in here. Last year I had the opportunity to step back in the classroom, and Sandra Abrams and I had developed a game-based curriculum, and so I stepped back into an inner-city school, and the students this really is interesting, so it's going to touch on a lot of what we've discussed. And so all of the students in the class were English language learners. They had all failed the state-mandated reading exam, so we developed this curriculum that was used as a reading intervention that used commercial off-the-shelf video games. And so from the beginning, students, of course, did a pre-questionnaire to get into the class, and they were kind of divided up into students who were interested in gaming and were interested in the type of game-based class, and those who were not. And a mix-up happened in the system, and we ended up with all students who actually hated video games and didn't want to be in the class. So you've got students that don't like video games, you've got students who already don't like reading, and anyway, really interestingly, throughout the course of the class, the way that we structured it was students kind of did a reader-writer workshop. They had choice in what video games they wanted to play, what they wanted to read. We went into things such as game design, plot, characterization, kind of through mini lessons, and they moved through, as I talked about before, the feedback loop, that kind of iterative cycle. And it ended up that 100% of the class, 100% of the students at the end of the class they ended up saying that they would love to have video games involved if it's in a manner that's a choice-driven manner. They all became readers. You know, they all were reading, taking home books for summer reading, and they all ended up passing their exam, their end-of-course exam, which they had all previously failed, which was, you know, reading strategies, embedded the reading strategies within what they were doing. So, you know, I think that it comes down to if an administrator is going to want teachers to implement video games and game-based learning, I think it comes down to choice and allowing students, if it's going to be in a classroom, there has to be that choice that students can choose to play if they want to play, or they can choose to do something else. You know, that it's not something that's forced upon them, because then that takes the joy out of what they're doing.
And Tara, you talked earlier about, you know, games aren't for all people. If you're going to make this happen in your classroom, what do you have to take account for? And then when you're successful, what does it look like? What could it look like?
So I can give an example of something I've done in my classroom, and I'll say I did it with all of my students, and I got pushback from some. And I totally agree that I think choice is awesome in classrooms. And if we think about all of the stuff that, at least in current schools, kids are force-fed every day, I think we can find space for games to be a tolerable, at least something to negotiate in the classroom. And for me, when I bring a game in, an alternate reality game, and I'll give an example, it's about thinking about shifting the codes of power, giving my students access to traditional big D discourses, right, and how students can engage in the larger world around them. And from a very Freudian perspective, how students can read the world around them through gameplay, right, through simulating taking on this identity in a game. How can they actually then apply that identity to the real world around them? So thinking about Wildcard Garth might make strategy guides and put them up on YouTube. Can my students, by the end of a gaming experience, create the context of school closures, for example? And so for me, like, these are the larger outcomes, right? They're tied to standards and all of that stuff as well. But I also think about, like, at the end of the day, if I'm going to spend 2 or 3 months using a specific game or a game model in my classroom, can my students fundamentally say they've done something different? They can act upon the world in a different way or have a new skill set as a result, sharpen an existing skill set. So for example, one alternate reality game I ran, I have the poster behind me. Let me grab it. Hold on. So on the first day of school, just handing out the syllabus to my 12th graders, there's this poster, which you're not going to be able to see very well, that was just sitting on the wall. There wasn't a lot of attention to it. And it just said lost, and you can't see it very well. It says lost Pufftron. And it says, if you see this box with blinking eyes on it, call this number and you'll get free breakfast. And so I'm going over the syllabus, saying what we're going to read, what we're going to do, and then about 15 minutes into my syllabus, the student's like, hey, and they point to the poster, and they point to the exact same blinking box on my desk, and I roll my eyes, I say, all right, call the number real quick so we can get your stupid free breakfast. And then this crazy hippie guy shows up the next day and gives everybody free breakfast. And then they're like, well, we found this box, but I don't know what it does. And then my students had to use forms of inquiry to figure out, what's this blinking box do? And to make a long story short, the game itself slowly emerged, and students realized that this box was measuring air pollution, right? It measured carbon dioxide, measured volatile organic compounds, light, temperature, sound. From there, they realized that there were actually 12 other boxes around South Central Los Angeles, and they had to look at the types of cycles and patterns of air pollution in the community. By the time they did that, the class had actually been split into 2 teams, and they were competing to collect the most data from these 2 boxes, right? I tricked them, right? And so some students really got mad about this, right? I wasn't in grad school yet, so I didn't think about the IRB issues of that. So that's a whole other conversation for another time in terms of deception in the classroom. But what this was about was having the story emerge, and the story was there's this pollution in South Central was so big and so billowing in terms of the clouds, the black cloud, that developed a consciousness. And so through Twitter and through these boxes, my students were talking to this cloud, right? They knew it was fiction, right? They knew they wouldn't look up and see this talking cloud, but some students liked this game for the competitive aspect, right, of these different kinds of data that they're collecting. Some students liked it for the storytelling aspect, right, that they could tell stories about the cloud. When there's an earthquake in LA, some students said, oh, that was the black cloud angry at us, right? And some students like this because of the social change aspect, that afterwards they can say, you know what, I found out my classroom is the most polluted space in all of South Central Los Angeles. I want to do something about that, right? There are different points of entry and different ways that we could weave together different narratives. But for me, they didn't have a choice. We were doing this, and we were doing it for the next 6 to 7 weeks in my class. And as a result, I tried to figure out how can we mediate, how can you differentiate your instruction with games, regardless of what the game is. So sorry, there's a long-winded example.
No, we're all chatting about it. We want to be in your class. We all want to be in it. So continuing this, Jane, I mean, and Hannah once again, and also Garth, you know, gaming in the classroom, when it works, what does it look like? We're going to talk about standards and Common Core and stuff like that in a second, but for now, when it works, like, what have you seen in the field? Just what Antero was talking about. What does it look like? What's the exciting part when it's working?
Well, for me, I haven't seen it in the classroom. I've seen it in after-school spaces. So teachers who are interested in games and see the power of them and see the utility and see the benefit of bringing them together to motivate young people. I've seen after-school gaming clubs kind of open up. But one of the things that I think is really poignant about Antero's example is you need a teacher that's that passionate as he was about the game and about creating it to make it, I think, be successful, right? So I don't think that this needs to be, I don't think teachers watching this should think, oh boy, now I've got to live up to that, or I've got to, you know, I've got to do that. How do I do that, right? So I think in as much as Garth has introduced us to this idea of interest-driven connections, I think that needs to also be the case for the teachers. The teachers have to be interested in this. So I've got a couple of local teachers here at School of the Arts who run the creative writing track of this high school. And they're interested now in how might video games be brought into their creative writing English classrooms in terms of writing narratives. So whether it be for video games or alternative reality games, such as what Antero described, but getting their students to write kind of the backstory and the narratives and the characters for games. And there's one opportunity that we might see be successful, but it wasn't because I, as the researcher, brought it to them. It's because they came to me and said that that was something that they wanted to do.
In many ways, I think it's, you know, like you said earlier, if it's an engaged, interested teacher, they can, you know, make and sell anything to their students, you know, gaming or otherwise. Hannah, you had a couple links on the show notes about, you know, World of Warcraft in schools and Portal. When it works in schools, what does it look like?
You know, I think it does. I think it comes back to a lot of different factors kind of falling in place and working together. You know, you having an administration that's open to dialogue about, you know, bringing the gaming in. I think if the administration isn't supportive of the idea, it doesn't matter how innovative the teacher is, there's going to be some types of stumbling blocks. And I think the teacher, as Jane was saying, you know, has to be passionate about it, him or herself. So, you know, to work from what I've seen is it really is an interplay of all of these factors kind of coming together, either whether it was the course that I taught in the high school or teachers that I've worked with, they have had the support of administration. So I think it's kind of this interplay. And then, of course, having students who are engaged and having the choice in how they play, because, you know, you're not going to have 100% of students in a class who are going to want to be doing the same thing. It's kind of like with teaching literature. I'm not a big fan of a whole class novel units. You know, so I think approach it the same way with games. You know, there's got to be, I've said it before, there's got to be some choice, and there has to be, you know, an inner working of administration, teachers, and students. It has to be a synergistic system.
One of the questions that just popped up from Twitter talks about game-based curriculum as a reading intervention. Is this curriculum available online anywhere? Do we have links to it?
We don't have it available online. We're working on publishing it. We do have, however, an empirical study that was published in Educational Media International that talks about some of the results, and we had a paper at AERA, and I can make both of those. I think I made the Educational Media International piece available It's from Mario to FIFA, so that will be in the shared folder, and I'll make the ARA paper available. I'll talk to my co-authors to make sure they're okay with that.
Very cool. So
yeah.
that's on the shared folder already, and the second one we'll try and get. But Garth, you mentioned earlier that this happened in your classroom. In your mind, in your experience, what does positive or successful use of gaming in the classroom look like? What could it look like?
Well, certain games, it depends on the game. So if it's Minecraft and you have a goal of building a certain building, and two people that might not get along, they might work together to finish this part, and they might actually bond, and they might become friends, and yeah, kind of stumbled on my words.
Well, you might not end up being best internet friends at the end of it.
Yeah, but I don't think they would hate each other after they helped one another out. If they helped each other out, you can't hate that person.
So I'll start off the next question with you, Garth, and this is something we talked about a little bit earlier. We talked about it in the Twitter chat. Earlier in the episode, we talked about some of the challenges or apprehension we have about schoolifying stuff that you love. We have, apprehension about taking something that you know and love, like gaming or Minecraft, and bringing it to school and just analyzing it to death and teaching it to death and assessing it. What are your feelings about teachers, or after this episode, schoolifying stuff that you love?
Well, stuff that I love, of course, I love it, so I'm passionate about it. And, they can't analyze it to death. They can't kill the game. You have to have some fun with it. You have to, as a teacher yourself, you have to like the game. You can't destroy the game by picking at every little bit and corner of the game. And games like Minecraft, I'm fine with. If my school brought Minecraft into education, I had a class, or if in math we got to go down to the computer lab and used it for math, that would be amazing. And it's games such as Call of Duty or Grand Theft Auto, games like that, those are the games that people are yeah, these are awesome games, but there's no point in bringing them into education. So you have to be careful on what games you choose, too.
This is what Jane was talking about earlier, and also Antero, is the teacher has to be doing it and involved in it. Antero, what do you think? What are the dangers of schoolifying this topic?
So a couple takes on this. One, yeah, I think something like the Black Cloud I was sharing earlier doesn't work if you don't have one that had a bunch of MacArthur funding behind it, right? So that's an example where you get a bunch of money. If you throw a bunch of money at school, amazing things happen. That's the big news of the day, right? But on the other hand, I think one thing to think about, regardless if you're someone who likes games or not, is games should make you as a teacher think about who gets to make the choices in your classroom, right? And as a result of those choices, what kinds of consequences can emerge, right? Because, like I said, if games are about moving towards resolution, who gets to make those choices, right? Who gets to determine how the hidden curriculum is unfolded within a classroom? And so, as I think about that danger of, if I bring Call of Duty in the classroom, am I appropriating youth culture in some way that diminishes it for other people? I think about a critical race theory stance. And this question of whose culture has capital within the classroom, whose culture is valued, right? Can we have an authentic conversation around video games, around board games, around Settlers of Catan with students, and think about, what does Settlers of Catan say from a colonial perspective, a post-colonial perspective, right? And I think about the ways we bring video games in. And Django Paris and Samuel Leem had a recent article in Harvard Ed Review about culturally sustaining pedagogy, right? Building off of the work of Gloria Ladson-Billings. I think this is a space for us to think about how we read and use games in classrooms, right? This isn't about appropriating texts, right? It's about using them as a way to culturally unpack and support the kinds of skills students are already coming into our classrooms with, right? If I know half of my students have seen Divergent, if I know most of my students are watching the new X-Men movie, right, or Maleficent, if I'm thinking about younger students, right, I should be bringing those in and using those as a way to anchor conversations about inequality, social justice, or whatever the content is that I'm using in my classroom.
That's one of the things that we didn't talk much about is, what opportunities are there for younger learners? Is there a place for gaming in the elementary classroom? Jane, what do you think about challenges of schoolifying? What's happening with gaming?
Well, I think one of the issues is around all of the pressures on teachers. So this idea that they're operating in a Common Core era, unless their state has rejected it recently, and all teachers are operating in high stakes kind of assessments, not only of their students but also of themselves. And so I think it's going to be really incumbent upon researchers and folks who work with teachers to help them see the connections between whatever standards they're trying to meet and how games can help them meet them. And that's really problematic, I think, for teachers. Here in New York State, there are so many different reform efforts that are being imposed in the classroom that I can understand why teachers would be worried about bringing games into their classrooms.
In terms of Common Core and you know, the data-driven decision making that we have in our schools, are those the only challenges that there are for teachers that want to make this happen in their classroom, or are there other hurdles that teachers have to tackle?
Well, Antero brought up a good point. You know, he was able to do his Black Cloud because he had lots of resources, right? MacArthur threw a bunch of money at him. So in some respect, teachers need resources. Whether it be technology, if it's digital games, or they might need support. They need a community that helps them understand how to do this. They need, you know, Hannah and her colleagues to have the time to publish the curriculum that they can now bring in as a reading intervention. So they need some resources behind them. And I think that's one issue. Around that question is it becomes really challenging for researchers who aren't working with foundations like MacArthur, which have done a fabulous job of funding some of this exploratory, descriptive, interpretive research and funding some of these really cool, engaging projects. If you try to get money from other sites, sometimes it's hard to set up the types of research and experimental designs or quasi-experimental designs that they want to see to, in their word, prove whether or not games work and will do these things.
Hannah, any points on the Common Core and challenges for teachers trying to make this happen in their classroom?
No, I think the others have pretty much you know, hit the main points. I think it really does come down to the peer support groups, making sure that resources are available, and then also making sure that there is adequate professional development that's available for teachers who are interested in engaging in it. So.
Antero, any final points?
Yeah, just thinking about like the Common Core stuff and the standards stuff. I think there's going to always be a chaos of change that surrounds schools in the United States today, right? And we're always going to be under-resourced as teachers in these spaces. And on the one hand, I think games are free, right? I mean, depending on the kinds of games you're using, paper, rock, scissors is the cheapest and easiest game to use in any context. And again, I think it's about democratizing the classroom, giving everybody a chance. And so your standards are always going to be able to align to something that's game-like, right? Even if you look at like the PARC assessment and Smarter Balance assessment, they're about synthesizing various texts and looking at the outcomes of them. It seems very game-like in those types of complex questions. And so I think that's a real opportunity.
Very cool. So what I wanted to do is I would give a chance for the panel to think about their final statements. Then we're going to move to Hiller Spires to bring us all together and act as our discussant. What I'd be interested in asking the panel is, where do they see this field heading? What are the next big steps? What are the things we should be researching? What are the things teachers should be trying in their classrooms? You know, where would you like to see, if we were to reconvene this discussion in 5 years, what's happening in the classroom? What's happening in research? You know, are we in the same spot? You know, if you were to dream a little bit, what would the next big steps be? While the panel's thinking about, and Garth, wildcard Garth, this involves you. 5 years from now, when you come back and visit us, what do you see? So while the panel's collecting their thoughts, and also Hiller's getting comments ready to go, I wanted to thank the panelists for coming out and spending an hour with us. thank the panelists for allowing me to hassle them via email for a couple weeks. This is a terribly important topic. We've had a lot of excitement about it. It's great bringing a bunch of experts in to talk about this and have some serious dialogue about what this means for our classroom and what this means for researchers. Once again, all of the notes are on the show notes. There's resources out there. We also will take the video from this, we'll pull the transcript, and we'll pull the MP3, have it available on a website for you. The panelists also shared some research and some publications that go along with it. It provides a nice sort of annotated bibliography of the comments. And then we also have a follow-up on the literacies chat. The first Twitter chat was great. It brought out some of the ideas that we talked about tonight. And then the follow-up, we'll post the date out there. I believe it's in a week, where we'll discuss a little bit more of the concepts here, and it provides you a chance to debrief a little bit. So I wanted to thank all the panelists for coming out, and then we'll have final thoughts, and then we'll let Hiller synthesize everything for us. So, Antero, where do we sit in 5 years? Where do you see the future heading?
So the future is heading towards teachers as game designers and students as people empowered to not only make and play games but publish them, right? The board game world is flourishing. There's a recent New York Times article that talks about this. And I would encourage teachers who are worried about, I don't know how to play games, all I play is Angry Birds on my phone, to think about not just the digital space of games, right? Get out a stack of Uno cards and hack them, right? Make Monopoly about, about other types of issues and hack it up and see what happens when you add Marxist values to a capitalist game. These are easy things to do with young kids, and I hope everybody's doing it in 5 years. And thanks for having me.
Thank you. Garth, where's gaming going to be in 5 years?
I think that it's still going to be, a lot of classrooms are going to be taking it in, and that there are going to be a few classrooms that don't want to take it in because the Board of Ed doesn't want to, but I think that gaming will flourish in education very soon, and for having me.
Thank you. Very political. Hannah, what do you think? Where are we going to be in 5 years?
I think in 5 years, I think there's a couple of areas of research that need to be explored, which I don't need to talk to you about right now, but I do think in 5 years, classrooms will become more game-like. I hate using the word gamification because it's just, to me, it's kind of a icky word sometimes, but I do think that classrooms will become spaces where, as I talked about earlier, learning becomes iterative. Classrooms have storylines embedded, very project-based kind of ideas that happen within classrooms, and that's how gaming will kind of get a foothold, where it becomes more of an equalizer rather than something that isolates.
Thank you very much. Jane, where are we going to be in 5 years?
So I hope we'll know more about games as assessments, and one of my doc students is interested in this idea of kind of the dashboard of games being something that teachers can use to look at how all of their students are doing on certain tasks, and I hope we find a way to kind of meld the worlds kind of a bit more seamlessly between education and gaming, so that classrooms aren't as resistant to games, the media isn't screaming about, how they're horrible for children, and that folks like Garth can see more connection between their in-school and out-of-school spaces. Excellent.
Thank you very much. Hiller, you want to synthesize everything for us?
Sure. It's been so difficult for me to stay quiet this long. First of all, Antero, Garth, Hannah, and Jane, thank you so much. It's been a stimulating conversation. I've been asked to do a commentary for Journal of Adolescent and Adult Literacy on game-based learning, so you guys have given me lots of fodder to think about as I try to organize those thoughts. So just a couple of summary points here. As we said earlier, just as literacy practices are contextualized in social situations and relationships, game players establish shared language and understandings within a game. And in essence, they gain fluency in a specialized language. To me, that is so exciting, especially for students who may have trouble or difficulty with standard language within a school, that they have avenues to acquire specialized languages in these different environments. And I was reminded of Katie Salen's work. She actually distinguished between game literacies and gaming literacies, claiming that the latter emerges from a gaming attitude. And she referred to this same idea as a stance of playfulness. And I think we can't overlook how important playfulness is within the game. And very often we start using games in school, and some of that playfulness does sort of fall off. And I think it's to the students, to our detriment. Salen also discussed how gaming literacy supports a performative learning stance based on the fact that games are dynamic, and as we mentioned earlier, rule-based systems that offer rules of engagement and stylized forms of interaction. A lot of folks talk about how do we get students to learn contemporary skills, 21st century skills in school. It seems to me that games offer such important context for developing these kinds of skills. And the work that we've been doing with Crystal Island, we decided to try to take the stance of doing experimental and quasi-experimental studies to see, you know, do these games actually make a difference in terms of school-based learning? And we have gotten results with that in the area of science for 8th grade and also for 5th grade. It's been difficult, as someone else mentioned earlier, to do that kind of research, but I do believe that that kind of research is important for the field. You know, case studies are valuable, and it helps us understand the nuances of what's going on, but I think for the long haul, especially as we're trying to look at policies and make changes within the schools, if we do have some research that points out and supports that learning, school learning, is actually affected in a positive way as a result of games, I think that that can only help the cause. And so I hope that, you know, some researchers will take that up and try to carry that agenda forward, in addition to some of the wonderful ethnographic research that's going on, which I absolutely love reading about. So I hope that, you know, we'll also try to do this other kind of research and synthesize it and put it together in a way that policymakers can understand, those who are making decisions about what's going on in education. We really need to make those kinds of cases, and very often it's the experimental and quasi-experimental research that will help convince them that this is a certain way to go with education. But thank you. I appreciate the discussion, and thank you for having me.
Thank you very much. Once again, I want to thank the panelists for taking the time. We've spent a good hour here talking about a great topic. We've developed some new BIFs, and so hopefully we keep in touch. And once again, let's bring it all back together in a week or so for the Twitter chat. That way we can have a time to have, allow people to debrief and compress and think about this a little bit more. So with that being said, thank you all for tuning in.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.